Okay. Okay. Excellent. We're holding here in the Gemara Mesechta Megillah, Daf Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. So the Gemara is in the middle of saying a long and fascinating story with what the back and forth, what's going on between Mordechai and Haman. So far, the king told Haman to go honor Mordechai with all the things that Haman suggested. Haman suggested, thinking that the king wanted to honor him. Haman suggested to give Mordechai, to give himself, just to give Mordechai a bridge. You know, you ever go into New York City from the George Washington Bridge? Whoever is collecting tolls on that bridge is a multi-billionaire. So he said, give Mordechai a bridge to own, give him a river to own, give him a village to own. And king said, do all of that. Plus, you have to lead him around the city and announce out loud in front of him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. And Haman had no choice. And he had to go to Mordechai. He went to Mordechai and tell him the news that you will be going around the city and I will be honoring you. And Mordechai was davening, and he could not interrupt Mordechai's davening. He waited until Mordechai finished davening. In the meantime, he sits with the students of Mordechai, and he asked the students of Mordechai, what are you learning? And they told him, we're learning now about the laws of Kmitza, bringing a karban, a flower offering the Beis HaMikdash, and you take a koimetz. A koimetz is 3 fingerfuls of flour, and you bring those on the Mizbeach. And that day was the second day of Pesach. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, you're learning about the karban omer. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, you bring the karban omer. The sacrifice had to come from barley that was grown, new barley that was grown fresh that year. And afterwards it was baked, was made into flour. And you brought from that flour, you had to get an omer. An omer is 43 2/5 eggs. And after that, you would take a koimetz, a piece of that omer, a piece, just a fistful, about 2 kezesim, 2 olives full, from that flour and burn it on the Mizbeach. Haman said, your koimetz, your fistful of flour has overpowered my 10,000 talents of silver, which I offered to give to Achashverosh to destroy the Jews. Now, Haman goes over to Mordechai and he says, I have to come to put on the royal garments and I want to bring you on the royal horse. And the king, and Mordechai told him, I'm sorry, it's not respectful for me to go put on the royal garments unless I'm freshly bathed, freshly groomed. So Mordechai told Haman, take me to a bathhouse. Now, which bathhouse and which barber shop is he going to go to? Obviously, I don't think a royal minister is going to go to Supercuts to get a haircut. So he went to the royal bathhouse, and Esther gave out a decree that all barbers and all grooms, none of them should be around. Everyone should stay home that day. So Haman had no choice but to bathe Mordechai himself and to give Mordechai a haircut all by himself. And while he's doing it, he's groaning. And Mordechai says, what are you kvetching about? And he says, until now, I was second in command to the king. Nobody was greater than me. And now I'm becoming a barber. And he says, don't you remember? For 22 years, you were a barber in the town of Kartzim. And that's what we're holding right now. Basar de shaklinu. Right after Haman trimmed Mordechai's hair, if you remember, we said yesterday, being at the second day of Yom Tov or Chol Hamoed Pesach, Esther did not want Esther did not want any Jewish barbers to cut Mordechai's hair, so therefore also all the Jewish barbers were gone, and therefore Haman had no choice. So after Haman trimmed Mordechai's hair, Lavshinu Lemane, he dressed Mordechai in the royal garments. But if you look at the Megillah, you see that when Haman told the king, you should honor the man that you wish to honor by having him put on the royal garments and have the royal horse. And he says, V'cheser malchus, and the royal crown should be on his head. Vasher nitan keser malchus barosha, the royal crown should be placed upon his head. In the next verse, Haman says, "V'nosin halavush v'asus." Let the horse and the royal garments be delivered into the hands of one of the king's noble princes, and he shall dress the man whom the king wishes to honor. In the beginning, Haman thought that the king is honoring him, and he thought to himself, "This is my chance that people should recognize I am going to become king next, and therefore the royal crown should go on my head." But he saw that Achashverosh became very uncomfortable. When he suggested to Achashverosh, you should put the royal crown on someone else's head, he became very uncomfortable. So you see in the future, whenever Haman talks about what he shall do to the man whom the king wishes to honor, he leaves out the crown. He says you should give the garments and the horse. And the king said, hurry up, take the garments and the horse that you have spoken about. Verse 11, and Haman took the garments and the horse, and he dressed Mordechai. So the royal crown did not make it onto Mordechai's head at the end. The royal crown, right? And so this drawing over here of Mordechai going through the city, let's just bring it up on the screen. So this drawing is accurate. It does, which does not have, I'm not sure if they could see it, but you see Mordechai is wearing, right? Haman's leading Mordechai through the city. That's his daughter about to dump all the excrement on him. So Mordechai is not wearing, he's wearing the royal garments, but he's not wearing a royal crown.
Where's the daughter?
Over there.
Oh.
She should be arrested by the sanitation department.
Oh, yeah? So continue the Gemara. So Haman trimmed Mordechai's hair. He dressed Mordechai in the royal garments. Amar le, he told him, Sak urechav, mount the horse and go ride. And so go onto the horse and I will lead you. Amar le. Mordechai answered to him, Lo yechilna, I'm not able to ride on the horse. I'm not able to climb up myself. We're 16a-b, I would assume. Maybe 16a-c. He says, Lo yechilna, I am not able to. The krisha chilai mimei tanisa. Mordechai says, I am too weak from fasting. It's my third day of fasting, and I'm too weak to climb on the horse myself. Gachin v'salik. So Haman himself had no choice. He had to bend down, and Mordechai climbed on his back to get onto the horse. The Medrash says, at that moment, Mordechai said the words we say in davening in the morning, Arivimcha Hashem kidi lisani. I will praise you, exalt you, Hashem, for you have made me poor. Meaning you have made me greater than my enemies. You do not make my enemies exult over me. Instead, I am able to exult over you. I'm able to exult over my enemies. I brought up this picture recently. You see this picture here on the screen. Here's a royal horse. This is one of the king's royal horses. This is from, this one was found, I think, in Shushan. This particular picture. I'm not sure if you could see it, so I'm going to just do screen like this. So here, if you see the horse, in order to get up onto the royal horse, there is a servant carrying a stool. You see? A servant over here, he's carrying a stool. So in order to get onto the horse, you always had a servant carrying a stool with them. But here, Haman is by himself. There's no stool. And the king wants him to go on, wants Mordechai to get onto the horse. He has no time to run around town and find the stool. So Haman himself had to bend down, and Mordechai had to climb up on him. And it says actually that these, we know every king had servants carrying footstools, and the footstools were all made out of gold. So Mordechai, the fact that he refused to get onto the horse by himself and insisted that he needs help getting onto the horse was completely appropriate. And that's why Haman was forced to comply with Mordechai, and he had to humiliate himself. And Mordechai climbed onto Haman's back. The Gemara continues. So afterwards, Kisalik, as Mordechai is ascending the horse, but he gave a good kick to Haman. Where did he give the kick? In a place that hurts. But he gave a kick to Haman. Some say he gave it to his head, some say to another part of his body. But he gave a kick to Haman. Amar Le, Haman tells him, Loik siv lechu, he knew a little bit of Torah, and says, does not say, Benefol oyivcha al tismach, when your enemy falls, you should not rejoice. This is Mishlei, Shlomi HaMelech, the wisest of all men, said that when your enemy has a downfall, you should not rejoice. So how come you're rejoicing when I am having a downfall? Amar Le, Mordechai answered him, Hani mili b'Yisrael. What type of enemy? It says, you shall not exult. Shlomi HaMelech says, don't rejoice when he has a downfall. Only a Jewish enemy. About you, the nations of the world, Siv, it says, V'ata abamesemai sidrech. You shall tread upon their high places. That, it says, the full verse says, V'kachashu evecha lach. When your enemies weaken you, if you fast and you become weak because of your enemies, it says, if you fast and Hashem will forgive you, you will then eventually, it's a promise in the Torah, you will be able to tread upon their high places. So Mordechai, he was now able to exult. He went from one moment, from being broken inside, screaming in the streets of Shushan, Zaka bitterly, and from fasting 3 days. And from one moment, he suddenly goes to exulting and glorifying himself over Haman. And it's a thing, I remember when bin Laden was killed. So there was a certain famous radio host, and somebody called him up saying, a frum person, how could it be that we rejoice when an enemy dies? It says you should not, when your enemy has a downfall, you should not rejoice. Had he learned this Gemara, you see that only applies to a Jewish enemy. But if Hitler or Stalin or any of these people have a downfall, or bin Laden or any anti-Semite, it's definitely a reason to rejoice, to be very happy.
Yeah, the only thing you can warn is that actually Noah should have had such a terrible descendant.
Correct. But he had a son, Cham. So.
Bin Laden was against Israel and the Jews, or was it America?
Yeah. Read his writings.
I don't want to
read all of his writings online. When they made a raid in his house, he wasn't a friend of the Jews.
He was a frum Muslim, I guess. Well, I don't know. I think he probably did a whole bunch of things with all those women he was with.
And it continues the Gemara.
There's a bunch of Jews trying to save the life of the killer, the real life killer. They're saying that wrong to, according to the Torah, blah, blah, blah.
To save his life. Listen, has anyone here ever sped, gone above the speed limit? Some people have gone contrary to the law, right? It doesn't make them non-citizens just because he went against the law, correct? So if a Jew tries to save someone as depraved as a tree of life killer, doesn't make him not Jewish anymore. It means he's just not going in the way of the Torah.
Yeah, we have to make an example out of that killer.
Correct. If you don't want it to happen again, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
As the Gemara now continues. Vayikra lefanav. So Haman was leading Mordechai, and he announced in front of him, "Thus shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor." So as Haman is riding along the street, Devei Haman, and he rode along the street of his own house. Can you imagine how embarrassing that is? Haman's passing by his own house, and he has to lead Mordechai on the horse. Chazise parte, the kaima aigra. So there's a big spectacle. I'm sure you have people lined up all over to see what's happening. And so Haman's daughter was standing on the roof of her house and seeing this spectacle that's going on. Savra, she thought to herself, Hai de Rachiv Avua. She is Haman's daughter, and she thought to herself, if anybody's getting honored, it must be that my father is the one getting honored, wearing the royal clothes. And it also makes sense. Mordechai was weak. So Mordechai was probably bent over, although it says he was singing praises to Hashem the whole time. V'hai de maski kamei Mordechai. And the one walking in front, leading the horse, must be Mordechai. She didn't think it was her father. But it makes sense. Haman was embarrassed. He didn't want anyone to see him, and his face was down in the ground.
Exactly.
So what did she do? Shakla atzisa de beis hakisei. They used to have, before the days of plumbing, they used to have a basin in the corner of a room, and that's where everybody went to the bathroom. Chamber pot, yeah, in Ir David, in the city of David. So they go through. This is a palace of a queen called Hilni Hamalka, and she was so wealthy that she had a separate room for her bathroom in her house. Everyone else did it outside of the city, or you needed to do it in the house. You had a chamber pot, She was wealthy, and she had her own. And she was so wealthy that they were able to dig up all the dung that was in these, all the human excrement, and see everyone was only able to eat this and this type of food. But she also had meat in her house, so she was wealthy.
Wasn't she the queen actually who converted to Judaism?
Correct. Mesechta Sukkah, it brings a story of her and her sons who were in a sukkah.
Some of the castles used to have water, on it. That's where they dumped it,
So they dumped everything. So she took that chamber pot and she dumped it on what she thought was Mordechai, was walking in front of
the man on the donkey.
the man on the,
The picture is not, it looks like she had one little thing in her hand and like a spoon.
Want to pull up that picture again? Where is it? Yeah, it's a chamber pot. Maybe this is this is a kid's book. Maybe they made it a little bit less graphic. Right?
Yeah, that's it.
We can imagine this is more the Haman, who everyone when he walks in front of, they have to bow down to Haman. And now suddenly no one's bowing down to him. For him, this is killing his ego. And Vishadise Aresha Davua. And she threw it on her head of her father, whom she mistakenly thought was Mordechai. Dali Eine, Haman raised his eyes in disgust. Who just dumped this whole thing on me? V'chazas, she saw Da'avuahu, that it was really her father, and out of great distress, Nafla me'igra la'ara, she fell from the roof to the ground, Umesa, and she died right away. Hainu d'chsiv, and this is what it says later on in the Megillah. How do we see that Haman's daughter died that day? Because before we do that, the next verse, Haman, verse Yubes, it says, V'yashav Mordechai, Sha'ar Melech, Mordechai returned to the king's gate. The Haman nidchaf el beisai avel v'chafoy rosh. Haman rushed home mourning, and his head covered. His head covered mean in excrement, right? In the stuff which, which doesn't smell too good. So, so avel means he was mourning. Why was he mourning? Why was he in avel? Because his daughter died. And chafoy rosh, his head was covered, meaning he was in shame, and he smelled because of everything that was covering his head. So this is what it says, Vayashav Mordechai al Shar Melech. So we explain the beginning of the next verse. Mordechai returned to the king's gate. Why did he return to the king's gate? Amar Rav Sheshes, says Rav Sheshes, Sheshav l'sakai v'tanisai. Mordechai returned to wearing sackcloth and fasting for the troubles of the Jewish people. Just because he was honored that day, he did not think that suddenly everything is good. And he realized, and he knew, and Mordechai knew, that this entire decree was not a natural progression. It was rather a spiritual thing. And although a person should not fast needlessly, but by Mordechai, it was a given that none of the nations of the world have any power to harm the Jewish people. No one could do anything bad on a nation level. And anything which does happen is Hashem himself doing it. And therefore, to get rid of any negative decree is by fasting and by putting sackcloth and ashes and continuing. And as long as the decree wasn't abolished yet, nothing changed from Mordechai's perspective. There's no reason why he should stop fasting, no reason why he should stop having sackcloth and ashes on his head. Only afterwards did he finally stop his fasting later on. But at this point, there was no reason why Mordechai should stop his fasting, because he knows very strongly where the real salvation comes from. That's actually an explanation of the Rebbe. But another very interesting thing brought down, why do we have to know that Mordechai returned to the gate? The Gemara has to tell us, to his sackcloth and to his fasting. So Rabbi Yonasan says a very interesting thing. Usually, when someone is sitting by a gate, what does that usually mean? It says about Lot. He was sitting by Shar Sodom, the gate of Sodom. What was he doing? Judging. A judge. You have several other places in the Torah. When someone's sitting by the gates, they're a judge. That's where the judges would sit. If you go to downtown, there's what's the name of those buildings? The center right by downtown.
Courthouse?
No, not by the courthouse. The big, like 5-6 tall office buildings with a square in the middle. So they have the bench judge, I think it's called, right? They have the judge of the bench, meaning the person who would give out street justice. Bench judge, downtown Pittsburgh. I'm trying to figure out what it's called again. All right, so the person who would be judging by the corners. So it says if Mordechai is going to the king's gate, probably you would think that he's going. Not sure where it is. I forgot what it's called. But there's like this guy. This guy over here. You see him?
Sculpture.
It's sculpture. He's called street justice. What's it called? This guy over here.
Because he's not real.
He's not a real person, but he's called the. Anyways, you go on the street, and the plaque over there says he's a street judge. People will come and have disputes, and he would arbitrate for them on the street, on the bench. So that's like there's a statue of him. So in general, right, a judge would sit in a public place, and he would arbitrate for people. So Mordechai says he's going back to the king's palace. We're talking about Yom Tov over here. second day of Pesach, or even if it's Chol Hamoed Pesach, right? If they wouldn't keep a second day of Yom Tov during outside of Israel during that time. But in general, what's Mordechai going back to judge on Yom Tov? Right? It's taking away from Simchas Yom Tov, right? You don't have court cases on Chol Hamoed. Sanhedrin doesn't judge. And we just saw that he was talking about the laws of Tiferes HaOmer, of the carbon Omer. So how could Mordechai judge in Yom Tov? So that's why the Gemara has to say that the reason was he went back to the king's gate was not to judge. The reason why he went back to the king's gate was in order to go back to his fasting and to his sackcloth.
But I think, it makes sense actually, if you do, because if you are gonna be having salvation, coming, but it hasn't yet come, so therefore you demonstrate to Hashem that you're not taking, actually for granted, I'm not going to do tshuva or anything, right? No, you're still gonna be continuing, you're not taking Hashem for granted, but at the same time, though, you have to, in your happiness to know actually that things are going to be turning around.
Correct. Very good. Now, the words of the pasuk, it says, Haman came, Avel, mourning, v'chafoy rosh, and his head covered in smelly stuff, excrement. When Haman came to the second feast, and Esther saw that now he's in a bad mood, he's not in a good mood, so then Esther realized now is my time to get Haman. As long as Haman was with Simcha, as long as he was happy, Esther felt she does not have the power to overcome Haman. So the first feast, Haman was happy. Sameach v'toiv lev, says the Megillah. He was happy and he was a very glad heart. Esther felt that she wouldn't be able to get rid of Haman, to destroy Haman that day. The second feast, he came, Avel, in a sad mood, and then Esther felt, now is my time, I can finally get Haman. Someone asked the Ragat Shavar he actually passed away right before Purim. His Yud Aleph, Tainus Esther Muktam, Tainus Esther, he passed away. And so someone asked the Ragat Shavar Gaon, his Levi was Erev, I think was that Friday, right before Purim. So somebody asked him, the order here seemingly does not make sense. What happened first? First, Haman's daughter dumped all the chamber pot with all the good excrement on top of Haman. Haman looked up and then she jumped off the roof, or she fell off the roof. The first thing happened was that he became very dirty. His head became covered in filth. And then he became an Avel. Then he became a mourner, because then his daughter died. How come the Megillah gives a different order? He says, first Avel, first he was mourning, then v'chafoy rosh, then his head became covered. Why does it give a different order in Megillah? So he answers, based on the Gemara in Baba Basra, a fascinating Gemara. Somebody has let's say a earthenware jug, which I'm on a roof, and I took Dovi's flower pot that's on the roof, and I threw it off the roof. Do I have to pay for it? Correct. Yeah. For sure, yes. What happens if I threw it off the roof, and before it hit the ground, somebody else came with a big stick, and while it's in the ground, he decided to practice, hitting a baseball, and he hit the pot, the flower pot, with a stick. Now the flower pot broke before it hit the ground.
He has to pay for it, the guy who broke it.
So the guy who threw it off the roof still has to pay for it.
Really?
Because the guy who threw it down the roof, threw it off the roof, he's the one who really broke it. And the one who threw something else it's a mana tvira tavar. That's what the Gemara says. He broke a broken pot.
I think American law, would be in reverse if I'm not mistaken.
What?
Wasn't broken yet.
Even though it wasn't broken, but he broke a pot that was destined to become broken. There was no chance that it should become unbroken. That should not be broken.
If it wasn't ruled that way, and someone dropped the pot and hit someone on the head, then the person who said hit the pot would have been guilty.
The person,
there's a logic to to the Gemara.
You're
It's
saying
gotta be the person who threw it, not
Yeah.
the person.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if, let's say it's a little bit different. You have your flower pot.
Mhm,
I take a baseball from 100 feet away and I throw it right at it.
mhm.
And after I threw my baseball, someone else from 20 feet away threw a different baseball. His baseball got there first and broke it. And my baseball only got there afterwards.
I guess actually the guy with the shorter baseball or.
Right. Then because it was not destined, nothing really happened with the pot itself.
Mhm,
The only difference was in throwing the balls. And here, it depends whose damage came first.
mm.
When the person threw it off the roof, the damage is considered to be done. Here, the damage is not done until it happens. Right? And therefore, the one whose ball hit your flower pot first, that's the one who has to pay. That's the one who's liable. So he says in a similar sense over here. What he says, Haman, and he takes the words of the Gemara very literally, it says when Haman was walking towards his house, when Haman was walking by, his daughter threw the excrement. She thought that it was Mordechai who was leading the horse. She didn't realize it was Haman, so she threw the chamber pot. So she actually moved the chamber pot. So so from the moment that she threw it down, it's considered to have considered already being going on Haman, even though it didn't hit him yet. The second she realizes, Haman looks up, even if it didn't hit him yet, but she realizes as her father, she fell off the roof out of great grief. So would be more like the second thing, the baseball, right? Sorry. So the first thing, meaning throwing it off the roof. She falling off the roof is like meaning she was going to die the second she fell off the roof. But her throwing the chamber pot full of stuff, dumping it on Haman is more like throwing a baseball. So therefore, it wasn't considered to be done until it actually hit Haman. But she was considered to be dead even before she hit the ground. That's what he brings it up there. He has a similar thing, continuing that the daughter of Haman, she actually did a mitzvah, a very, very big mitzvah, right? But she didn't have in mind to do a mitzvah. She was embarrassing Haman. She made Haman very downtrodden, eventually leading to the salvation of the Jewish people, right? Imagine a guy comes to the king's feast, smelly and dirty, and instead of Mordechai, ended up being her father. She actually ended up doing a mitzvah. Many times people want to do something bad, but it ends up being something very good, right? End up doing a mitzvah. A famous example, the brothers of Yosef tried selling Yosef to Egypt, and Yosef tells him it was part of Hashem's plan that should save you and the whole world from hunger. So she wanted to throw something on Mordechai and ended up going on Haman. So at that point, she said she already started fulfilling her mission. She did her mission in life, what she was there to do. And then she died right away. So the Raga Chabragan says, Dali Eineha, if you want to read these words of the Gemara, it wasn't that Haman lifted his eyes, but she lifted her eyes. When she lifted her eyes, she realized, I meant to do something bad and ended up doing something good. And then she had no more purpose left to live. So before we continue with the Mishnayos Mesechta Middos, I want to have a very interesting thing in our Gemara. This is in the year 1984, Tashin Mem Daled. You were around then, right?
1984?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was a children's rally, which took place right before Purim. This is Rabbi J.J. Hecht. He was one who always read Now, the Rebbe would have rallies for children, meaning say sichos, especially for children. And they would say the psukim, right?
I was a teenager in 1984.
You were a teenager in 1984?
Yep.
Right, so, the Rebbe would speak for them, but here in this video isn't the best quality. But at this children's rally, right, in 1984, so Rabbi J.J. Hecht, he's very loud, very dynamic person. You see the Rebbe speaking to the children, and he'll get them stuck afterwards. But I'm just going to make it as loud as I could. JJ Hecht, Rabbi Yaakov Yehuda Hecht, he talks exactly our Gemara. He says the story of our Gemara, and then he makes the kids do something.
Now, but you must listen to Shiur Zkainim.
It's like 3 minutes.
I wanna do something special with you, Kinderlach, today. Listen to me. But you must listen very attentively. Everybody, all the Kinderlach, the boys and the girls. Let me tell you something. I'm gonna take a minute, but I must do this. I want everybody to listen. Now listen. In the time of Haman, we heard already today that the Kinderlach were the one who got rid of him. How did they do it? Because Mordechai Hatzadik took together all the Kinderlach, and when they got together with Mordechai, and Mordechai told them what happened and what Haman was trying to do, they made a certain promise to Mordechai Hatzadik. The promise was when they said that we're not going to go away from you. We're not separating from you. And they said that we are with you. And with that prayer, Mordechai Hatzadik was able to break the decree of Haman of Russia, and the great miracle of Purim took place. Now, I want the kids here to make a declaration to the Rebbe, like we made the Mordechai Hatzadik then. So get up on your feet and follow what I'm going to tell you now. Everybody stand up, just like in the days then when there was Mordechai Hatzadik. We have Mordechai Hatzadik in nowadays too. But listen, we're going to say this to the Rebbe 3 times. It's going to be only 5 words. And the 5, we're going to say it first, then we'll say it all together. The 5 words are Loi nipored mimcha anu imach, which means that we're not separating from you, Rebbe. We are with you. And the Rebbe will take us out of Kollel for Kollel. No more playing games. We got to get it done. This is the way we're going to do it. So, Kinderlach, all together, let's say, Loi nipored mimcha anu imach. Again, Loi nipored mimcha anu imach. And the third time, to make it a chazaka that the Rebbe was talking about today. Loi nipored mimcha anu imach. The Rebbe should be well and take us out of Kollel b'simcha v'tuv leivav, the kabel pnei Moshiach Tzidkenu, the karev mamish.
Anyway, so that was, I don't know if you're able to hear so well over here. You were? That he made all the children stand up and repeat the same statement that the children told to Mordechai. It says, Lo nipared mimcha anu imach. We will not separate from you, and we will stay with you. This is what the children told Mordechai back then. And that's what got rid of the decree of against the Jews. And we will continue with
The broom's got a little bigger since they had the broom on it.
uh-huh.
Look at the broom.
Let's continue with learning about the Mishnayos and Mesechta Middos, learning about the Beis HaMikdash. So we learned there's altogether 24 places where the Kohanim and Leviim would stand guard around the Beis HaMikdash. All around the 4 corners of the base of the Hatzvi-Bais on the inside, the 5 gates of the Hatzvi-Bais. Then we said that they stood guard by the 5 gates of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, the 4 corners of the outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and as well as in 3 more places, they stood guard. Altogether, 24 places where the Kohanim and Leviim would stand guard around the Beis HaMikdash. See over here. Now, we don't have any proof that there are actually little huts for the guards to stand, just that they decided to make a drawing of huts. Either just makes sense that they were under some type of shelter, or just to show us where, each of the watchmen would stand. But around all these places, there would be watchmen standing to watch the Beis HaMikdash. By all these 5 gates on the inside, the 4 corners on the inside, the 5 gates of the courtyard. Every one of these gates over here, and the Kohanim would be as well as on top over here, and over here. So altogether, 24 places. Now, you have 24 watchmen, but then you had watchmen on the watchmen in the Beis HaMikdash. Continuing with the Mishnah. Ish Hatzvi-Bais, he was an officer in charge of the entire Temple Mount. He used to walk around to every single shift. And he would have other people walking in front of him, holding torches. And as he's approaching, every single guard booth had to tell him and to rise and would tell him, Ish Hatzvi-Bais, Shalom Alecha, Shalom to you, officer of the Beis HaMikdash, officer of the Temple Mount. Niker Shu Yashin, if it was obvious that he fell asleep, then he used to beat him with his rod, with his stick. How dare you fall asleep when you're guarding the Beis HaMikdash? Ureshus hayalai lisraif es ksusai. And there was even permission to take his coat and to burn it. And then you have to realize you couldn't just go to the store and buy a new coat. You could take his garments and his clothes of the person who's sleeping, and you could burn it.
Hopefully not while it was on him.
No, hopefully not while it's on him, correct. It's like Nichelm, the person comes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, huge miracle happened. He says, what happened? He says, my wife did she was cleaning my clothes and she saw, she cleaned my pants and was hanging on the clothesline and she was taking a stick and hitting it. That's the way they would, clean it out. She was taking a stick and hitting it over and over. He says, what's a miracle? He says, a miracle, I wasn't wearing it then. The Haim Aimrim, so people would say, correct. But I'm assuming it would apply to Kohen as well, right? The Kohen had 3 places and the Leviim had 21 places. So any one of these 24 people, if they fell asleep, then you could hit him with a stick to wake him up, and he could beat him and he could burn his garments. And they would say, Ma koel ba'azara, what is the voice which we hear coming from the place of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash? And they would answer him, Kol ben Levi loike. This is a cry of a Levi who is being beaten. The uvegadav nisrafin, and his garments are being burned. Sheyashin lo yamishmartei, because he fell asleep on his watch, on his duty. So, Mr. Nadish asked the question, seemingly only a Levi, the Rambam actually writes, only the Leviim would have this punishment of being beaten in order to be woken up. I'm saying the Rambam actually writes, only the Leviim would be the ones who would have to be, who the officer of the Temple Mount would wake him up, and not the Kohanim.
However, actually, the wider sense, It's even Kohanim or Levi, actually, you've been Levi.
Correct. So, but I think that's a point of discussion.
Was the officer a Kohen or a Levi?
Yeah, officer must have been a Levi. That's the ones who served in the Beis Hamikdash.
And they had the responsibility to be up and watching. But the
Correct.
Kohens didn't have that responsibility.
The Kohanes had that responsibility in 3 places. And the Levium in 21 places. And not to think this is only theoretical. What? Eliezer ben Yaakov says, "Pa machas matzu es achi ima yashin." One time they found my uncle, my mother's brother, sleeping. V'sorfru es ksusay, and they burnt his garment, but they didn't actually beat him; they just burnt his garments.
So I'm a little confused. These were the garments that he was wearing at the time?
I think so. I mean, what it seems like to me is they used to have to wear a special type of cloak, or sort of like a uniform. It wasn't the garments that you would serve in the Beis Hamikdash with, but also a certain type of uniform, and like a prestige, sort of like a soldier's uniform. And that they would take it away.
Did we have any like ceremonial spears or anything when they were guarded?
No, they wouldn't have any weapons. I think they were standing without anything. Next Mishnah Gimel. The third Mishnah is going to speak about the 5 gates of the Temple Mount. Chamisha sha'arim hayu l'Hatzvi-Bais. So maybe let's look at the 5 gates before we see it inside. Picture of it. Go through over here. So the Temple Mount, we said, had 5 gates. This is called the Shar Shushan, the Shar Teddy, Shar Kipoinus, Shar Chulda, and other Shar Chulda. 2 gates called Shar Chulda. We'll get to every single one of these 5 gates. So back to the Mishnah. It says Chamisha Sha'arim Hayu Lo L'Hatzvi-Bais. There were 5 gates to the Temple Mount. And we're talking about the original Temple Mount, which was 500 amos by 500 amos. Afterwards, Herod, he expanded the Hatzvi-Bais, the Temple Mount, became much, much larger. It became 34 acres. Much larger area than the original Hatzvi-Bais. And which were Shnei Shar Chulda min Hadarim. From the south side, southern side, you had these 2 gates called Shar Chulda, which you could see the remnants of them till today. They were called Shar Chulda because Chulda, the prophet, she would stand between these 2 sharim, 2 gates, and say prophecy. Also, her grave, she was buried, one of the only people buried in the city of Yerushalayim, and her grave was all the way at the bottom of the staircase leading to the Shar Chulda. So Chulda and Chulda Basara should have refuah shalema.
Amen.
So the 2 Shar Chulda, the Chulda gates were on the southern side. Mishamshin Knisa v'Yetzia. These were the main entrances and exits to the Beis Hamikdash. You have today what's called Wilson's Arch, leaving the Kollel Rabbi. It's a place where there was a grand staircase leading to the Shar Chulda, to the gates of Chulda. Then there was a next one called Kipoinus. Kipoinus, let me bring up a picture of Kipoinus. Let's see if here it is. This is Shar Kipoinus. This is right behind the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. This wall over here is the Kollel HaMarabi, the western wall. Between the wall of the Azara, the courtyard, which is this wall, and this wall, which is the Kollel HaMarabi, the western wall, and there's a gate going right behind. And if you go under in the tunnel tours, you can see exactly where the gate is. Now it's closed up with stones. There was beautiful Gan V'radim. There was a Hilni Hamalka planted, a garden with roses. So in Greek, the word Kipoinus means roses. So that's why it's called Shar Kipoinus. The Kipoinus gate. Some say that this was the name of the person who built the gate. So behind the Beis HaMikdash, the western gate, the western wall, it's called Shar Kipoinus, and of all the gates of the Beis HaMikdash, this is the only one that's still existing. Right? The Shar Choda was destroyed, but we have the stairs of the Shar Choda. But the gates of the Beis HaMikdash, the only one still around today, is called Shar Kipoinus. And this was on the western side. Mishamesh Knisa V'Yetzia. And it also was used as an entrance and an exit to the Beis HaMikdash. So now let's go to the next gate called Shar Tedi, or Tadi, Minat Safin. Here's Shar Tadi. From the northern side, on this side, you had one gate on that side called the Shar Tadi. It's called Tadi because Tadi is Aramaic for secret. And this gate was used for anyone who had secret business in the Beis HaMikdash, meaning someone who didn't want to come in from the main gate, or someone who became tameh, became impure, and had to leave the Beis HaMikdash. They wouldn't want to leave from the main entrance, so it would be embarrassing for them. Let's say a Balkari became Balkari in the middle, right? A Seminole mission, something like that happened. So they would leave the Beis HaMikdash by means of this gate, the northern gate, called the Shar Tadi. And some say that actually the name of the gate is called Tari, which in Greek means three is three, right? Three. In Russian, in many languages, Tari. Instead of Tadi, say Tesdalid Yud, his name is Tari, Tes Resh Yud. And he says that the reason why it's called like that is because there was a design on top of that gate which had a triangle on top. And since it had a different, like a triangular design, that was like sort of the sign that anybody who's tameh should leave from this gate. So it's called the triangular gate because there's like a triangle shape on top of that gate to tell people you could leave from this gate. So that was on the northern side, right? Shar Tadi. Loi Haya Mishamish Klum. Now, this was used only for special, unique cases, but for everybody else, they would not be able to use that gate. So this gate was only used for certain unique people which were tameh. See if we could find this. A Temple Mount. Maybe there's a picture of Shar Tadi here. All right. So these are different entrances to the Hatzvi-Bais, the Temple Mount. Here's actually a nice picture showing you where each of the guards were. I'm looking specifically for Shar Tadi. So it had a special, this use was only for people which were tameh. Shar HaMizrachi, then you had the eastern gate, and this was called Shar Shushan, the Shushan gate. The gate on this side, on the eastern side. You want to get the Shushan? You got to get your Shushan, perhaps. But this was a gate facing Har HaZeisim, the Mount of Olives. When you go to the Mount of Olives today, it's much higher than the Hatzvi-Bais, and you have a beautiful view of it. You can see the Hatzvi-Bais very clearly. And from Har HaZeisim, if you remember, there was a special bridge. There was a special bridge which was built. Okay, let's go like this. Going from Har HaZeisim, from the Mount of Olives, and it will go, here it is. This was called Shar Shushan. This is just the drawing of the Shushan gate. It was 10 amos wide, 20 feet wide, and 20 amos tall, 40 feet tall. And on top, there was a drying of the city of Shushan, because when the Jews returned to Eretz Yisrael and they built the Beis HaMikdash, they were still under the rulership of the Persian king, right? Daryavesh, Koresh, all the Persian kings were still ruling them. So they said, you could build your Beis HaMikdash fine and well. We just want you to remember who's boss over here. So they had them make a design of the city of Shushan in the Beis HaMikdash. So when so they had it out by the entrance of the Hatzvi-Bais. So anybody walks into the Hatzvi-Bais, right away should see the city of Shushan and should now honor and should sort of have fear and awe of the rulers of the kings of Shushan. So they decided we're going to put it on the eastern gate, and that's where they put it. Now in Shar Shushan, Shaboy Kohen Gadol, Seiref Es Apar, V'chol Masada Yetzim L'Har Mishcha. From this gate over here, they built this very large bridge going to the Mount of Olives right behind them. So let's go over here. You'll be able to see a picture a little bit. Here's the Beis HaMikdash. From the front of the Beis HaMikdash, you see this large over here in this picture over here. You see this walkway coming out of the Beis HaMikdash to that gate. This is called Shar Shushan, the Shushan gate. And this walkway would lead straight to the Mount of Olives. Will be opposite the Har Mishka, the Beis HaMikdash. And the reason is because you on the Har Mishka, on Har Zaysim, the Mount of Olives, they would bring the paraduma, the red cow, the red heifer. And you were not allowed to become tamei, impure. So let's say there was a dead body in the ground and nobody knew about it. If you walk over it, you become tamei, become impure. And they want to transfer the ashes of the paraduma from the mountain, Har Mishka, the Mount of Olives, to the Beis HaMikdash. So they built a very large walkway with tunnels, with like arches. So even if there was a dead body, the tumah stops by the arch, and then there's another arch. So then people will not become tamei. So they would, whenever there'll be a paraduma, there was only one in the first base. There were none in the first Beis HaMikdash, and from the second Beis HaMikdash, there were 6 of them. Not 6. There were 5 of them in the second Beis HaMikdash. But the first one was done by Moshe Rabbeinu. The second one was done in the second Beis HaMikdash. So he had a period of close to 1,000 years without any paraduma. And so they would walk. Everybody, all the Kohanim and everybody would walk along that big aqueduct from here, and they would walk out to the Mount of Olives, which is further up in that direction. And over there, they would burn the paraduma on Har Mishka, on the Mount of Olives. And then from there, they would walk back along this bridge into the Beis HaMikdash. So that was the main purpose of this gate, was mainly for the Kohen Gadol, who would burn the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol and everybody who was involved in burning the paraduma. But otherwise, this gate on this side, which is called Shar Shushan, was not really used too much. So they sort of took the painting of Shushan and they put it on the least used gate in the entire Beis HaMikdash. Okay, Yasher Koyach. Hope it was okay today.
Oh, definitely.
Well, let's go back into here.